Firstly, thanks so much for having us here. This is Kindle's first event in Presidency College. We hope to bring together many more such interactions and many more authors to you in the forthcoming future. Kindle is a monthly for the arts, culture, and politics. If it's West Bengal, of course, politics has to be there. We just completed 50 issues 2 months back, and our tagline reads, Ideas, Imagination, Dialectics. So through our long essays, features, stories, photo essays, we try to constantly question the status quo. Our current issue, The Emperor's New Clothes, calling democracy's bluff, has just hit stands. In the larger narrative of democracy being the be-all and end-all for progress, we are questioning the very fundamentals of democracy in this cover. And why not with the farce called American elections and with the great Indian circus that's unveiling in New Delhi, we can promise that this is going to be a very edgy read for you. So do grab your copies, and these are for sale. Some of our back issues are also here. These are not for sale, so you can pick them up as many as you want. Now, coming to today's session, I really don't know how should I introduce Sarnath Banerjee. Of course, Harappa files, the barn owls, wondrous capers, and corridors have enthralled us. But you know, yesterday I was at a discussion, a very invigorating discussion at Max Muller Bhavan, where Sarnath was one of the speakers. And he said that people are his archives. When he said people are his archives, it really got me thinking. It's only when somebody has deep insight and deep knowledge of what he's dealing with can he be playful with that material. So Sarnath is very playful with his materials, constantly breaking linearity, playing with narrative structures. And I think Gallery of Losers is an extension of that project. In this ever-expanding hope industry, the industry for winning formulae, Gallery of Losers is definitely a project that needs to be intensely debated and discussed. And that's why we are here. So friends, please put your hands together for Sarnath Banerjee in conversation with Kindle editor Pritha.
So hi everyone, and thank you once again for being here. And I suppose you do have good enough reason to be here. You have to listen to this maverick man who's sitting right beside me. And he calls and relates to himself as the quintessential loser. And nevertheless, he's sitting right beside us, very ironically basking in all the glory of his successes. He's been internationally recognized as an artist by no less than the London Olympics 2012. So here's the contradiction. Let me just start with asking Sarnath, are you still the loser?
Thank you very much for inviting me. And thank you, Kindle and Pritha particularly. Great admirer of such a gorgeous cover. I just heard that Pritha and team spend an entire evening putting this together. Entire night, did you say? Entire night with plasticine, and then got it photographed. And this reminds me of how old magazines used to run, you know, like during those good old times when magazines were absolutely the most important cultural documents. And so this, I think, is very heartwarming that at least there are some magazines who are away from that whole corporate, with business managers and sponsors and all. So it's very nice that, so thank you very much. I love to be associated with something like this and such a vibrant team. I guess I'm sitting with students from Presidency College and St. Xavier's College. So I think the conversation about losers is not perhaps very appropriate here, because none of you are, I suppose, losers. They're all been selected through very rigorous processes, and that's why I believe I'm not one of you. I'm always been a bit of a second best person. Although I do believe that my college still is quite good, but it's not here, it's in Delhi. But it's certainly inappropriate. This is a very inappropriate audience. Nobody is a loser here, but except for me, I suppose. And to answer Preetha's question about whether I still feel like loser, it might sound a bit hypocritical because yeah, there has been some notoriety, there's been some notice over the last few years, but I often feel that it's almost as if society has a tremendous ability to hold you up as the mirror every now and then, to kind of, okay, let's play with Sarnath Banerjee for the time being, or let's play with on the same tone Sania Mirza for the first time. I mean, let them play around for a bit, and then we're going to like take the ladder off, and then sort of, the ability of popular media to kind of, put people up and then suddenly throw them out makes you always a little vulnerable. And it is important to be vulnerable, because it's a bit like I might have said this before. I'm an old man, so I kind of repeat myself a lot. It's a bit like walking on fire. Anybody has walked on fire? Not metaphorically, but literally. I guess doesn't look like the fire walking type. And neither have I. They say that you need to be nervous. And when you are nervous, you create a little film of sweat under your feet, and that sweat creates a ceiling. So one day, if you're suddenly so cocky about walking on fire, you forget to sweat. You might burn yourself rather badly. So in that sense, this vulnerability that this is now Sarnath Banerjee's arc. I mean, people coming and saying, is the same bunch of people who once upon a time said that graphic novel, mane novel with graphics, or is it pornographic novel? Or one Bengali newspaper saying, if you can't draw very well, and if you can't write very well, if you combine the two, then perhaps you might create something which is quite nice graphic novel. So I'm just saying that there's always the ability of anybody to say anything. So you are always a perpetual loser. And it's great, because if you are comfortable with that identity, it's fine. And then sometimes we can even celebrate it and get commissions and Gallery of Losers.
So I guess, Sarnath does point out the ephemeral quality of most of the things around us. We are in a pretty continual flux of ideas, happenings, etc. And it is all the more important that we kind of try and make sense of what's happening around us and try and figure out, what lasts. There are some eternal ideas, ultimately, and not just ideas that come and go. But anyways, as the talk is titled, The Dialectics of Loss, I'd just like to adopt a very dialectical approach to what we are trying to say over here, or find out and explore along with all of you, is that, we won't be debating about and, kind of trying to raise rhetorical points about the euphoric highs of winning versus the charismatic depths of losing, which is better, which has more dignity. I don't think I would be doing that. Rather, we would be very creatively exploring the irreducible tension between the two. There's always this tension, and then trying to synthesize perhaps a new idea, a new vocabulary of winning and losing. And the material that we have over here is quite vast, but the starting point is Sarnath's Gallery of Losers. This is a series of billboards and posters and newspaper ads that he had created for the London Olympics. And it was almost like a counter-narrative of sorts, where he focused on the losers instead of the winners, people who did not quite make it to the podium. So, can we go through some of those slides? Is it possible right now? And so, if we could, or else we have some of them in the magazine, and so we could show it to you, and then perhaps we have, right? Great. So, but then Sarnath could start with talking about the inspiration for the Gallery of Losers and what it exactly means to him.
Actually, Shayan just mentioned that people are, actually I mentioned it yesterday and Shayan remembered it, that people are archives, and I sort of bank on people. I mean, I look around for things to happen. I look around for stories to happen. I have, before, not anymore so much, I used to keep multiple identities. I would go to parties and I would sort of, introduce myself as different people. I would take the persona of sometimes the distributor of industrial absorbents, a police reconstructor, a publisher of chemistry textbooks, obscure professions, just so that I could kind of get into conversations and acquire sort of knowledge. And the loser, the idea of gallery of losers happened perhaps many years back when I was still in school. I remember we just given our ICSE exams, and all of us passed. The results had come out, and we decided to go to a little bar in Free School Street. One of those sort of very dodgy looking establishments which moment you walk in you start feeling sleazy, and I often acquire all my stories from very sleazy places, whether it's Calcutta, whether it's Moscow, whether it's Budapest. I tend to attract sleaze and attracted by sleaze. So that started quite early. I was in class 10 and I was drinking gin with lime cordial, an ancient drink. I don't know whether people drink that sort of stuff anymore. You get very high, right? It is meant to make you it is not meant to make you high. It is meant to make a horse high. But some of us behave like horses also after that. And so I had this drink and I was already getting quite tipsy, which is when the barman came up to me, felt bad I suppose, and said that, beta piyo, zarur piyo, magar, I think I told you this, magar itna piyo ki girne ka tamiz rahe. And that was amazing because girne ka tamiz is very interesting because people know how to, everybody knows how to behave when you win. You just show your dentures. You just remember to brush and show your Colgate smile, and that's winning. Or you are cocky, or you are you have that sort of, very unimaginative. There's only that many things that you can do when you win. But if you lose, there's a whole range of things you need to do. So the idea of so that's when it started, this whole idea of this whole journey about losing, because when you're younger, you're cocky, you think the whole world is yours. You might have won some college debate and you start thinking that you're actually a great public speaker. Then you're then you find people like you who also think that they're the best. I live in Berlin, and every child is taught to be in Hindi. A friend of mine used to say that the tulsi of their own angan, meaning the sort of the flower of your own pond. But then when one tulsi of one's own angan meets another tulsi of their own angan, and then they realize that they have to work together, the entire thing falls apart. So the whole deal is to sort of you start off being cocky, and then rest of your life is a voyage of how sophisticated you are in how to deal with these sort of minor failures without needing to read Deepak Chopra for God's sakes, but just just how to deal with the sort of rejections, millions of rejections. I know Indian men, their courtship behavior is very simple. People call it the lamppost. You stand next to the person like a lamppost till the person weakens and has to accept you. Of course, there's not much failures in that. But even for some of us who attempt how to objectify sort of, in that. Anyway, it requires a lot of sort of human ability to kind of understand how to. And I feel that came to fruition in Sao Paulo one afternoon. we were, I think Pritha knows the story, so I'll just sort of quickly go over it. I think we have it. The story, it's in that same Manthan folder. If you see, there's a judo written on that. But anyway, it doesn't matter, even if you don't have it. So, we decided to go, I was in Sao Paulo doing some graphic interviews, meaning like journalism using text and image, which means that you can have a more discursive, more understanding of atmosphere. Like if some people got killed in some village in Maharashtra or Bihar or wherever, if you go there without actually showing any killing, just by showing the porn. I mean, I'm talking, say for example, you're doing a reportage on infanticide, female infanticide, just by showing the river, the boat, a midwife, a chai shop, a place where crime was committed, a narrative, just like these sort of visuals, you can actually create a very eerie sense of the space, like a very frightening idea of that space without needing to actually sort of, hammer it down. So similarly, I was doing these graphic narratives, and I met Douglas Vieira, who was a judo champion. He went to the Los Angeles Olympics. This is the same Olympics where Carl Lewis became very famous, and he lost the final to he defeated the Japanese favorite, but lost to the Korean underdog, because he was a high-minded judo player, meaning he was philosophical. He was like Marcus Aurelius, or I don't know, sort of Cicero of judo, or Hegel of judo. And he had all these great ideas about how to do judo, but the Korean guy did judo like a paddy farmer. He just pulled him down, kept him in the floor, and he could just see time passing by, and anyway, he lost. Several years later, Sarnath Banerjee appears at his doorstep to do an interview to a man who speaks not a single word of English. And I had an assistant, a very attractive assistant, who was my interpreter as well. So we started talking, and Douglas started talking about his days as a judo and his coming back, and how he was touted up to be this champion, but he could not. And there was this disgusting younger daughter sitting in one corner, sort of disgusting in the sense she was really kind of quite unpleasant for some reason. But while we were about to leave, that disgusting, unpleasant daughter went inside and got a small blue bag with SAS written on it, Scandinavian Airlines. I think a lot of us also had uncles who used to carry these SAS bags. And from inside the SAS bag came out this sort of slightly yellowing newspapers of Douglas's earlier, sort of medals that he won and all that. Anyway, next morning he invited me to his dojo, and there he threw me 12 times. I think I even have an image of that somewhere. And yeah, it is also in my faith. So 12 times he threw me, and each throw was an incremental understanding of how one gets thrown, in the sense how one falls. And he told me that judo is not so much about falling as much as it is about, not so much about throwing, but how you fall, because there are all sorts of ways. There's a whole philosophy about how you fall. And that happened in 2008, and that was the time when I actually had the idea of the Gallery of Losers. And then you start working on it many years later, and finally you reach a point where Olympic sort of commissions it, and then but it's also about people of Bhopal, but we'll get into that later.
So that's a pretty interesting story of how all of this started. But we just in a way it sounds okay. Let's not get there first. But first, let me just ask you a very specific. Yeah, just a very specific question. Because since you created this for the Olympics, And also in your interview to Kindle, you said that, Olympics should be about losing. It should not be about winning. So, speaking specifically about the Olympics, first of all, it's not so much about individual losses or gains. There's this grand idea that you're representing your country, right? And surely everybody is there to win, and surely no athlete plays to lose. So this whole idea, this whole perception of the goodness of loss, sometimes also might sound like an outsider perspective, which has nothing whatsoever to do with the celebration of loss if there is any. Right? So how do you explain that?
Because there's no discourse about losing, and we are starting already just right now. I mean, of course, there is the sad Roman Marcus Aurelius, who had a whole discourse around losing, but they haven't. I'm just saying that, suppose you are a musician, or you are a curator, or a magazine editor, or a whatever, a student. There are many ways to continue doing your practice, or like sort of, being in love with what you do. Say, for example, I love composing music. Today I made a bad one, tomorrow I made a bad one, but I mean, that's not going to stop me from being motivated enough to actually go back home and like compose music or play the piano, or whatever the case might be. With sports, suppose I'm a high jumper, and after 25 years of a long career of high jumping, where every morning I go to Maidan and I kind of jump I spend all my glory days jumping, and I think about jumping all the time. I only think about lightness and levitation. My day and evening things starts off with, how can one defy gravity? By reading light literature, perhaps. It's all about lightness. So, Chetan Bhagat, I suppose, we were talking about him. Or listening to light music, Pankaj Udas, I suppose. Or eating light food, egg roll. I don't know. I mean, so I'm just saying that your entire life is about lightness, and you want to just sort of levitate. And then every evening when you see that shelf, and at the end of that shelf there's a single bronze medal, that the entire thing you have won in your life is that single bronze medal. It is terribly difficult next morning to go and jump. But that's what you want to do, because that's the only thing you like doing. You don't want to be like a ENT specialist or a Eastern Railway employee. You are basically a high jumper. Your body is made of it. It's just that you don't win. That's a small detail. But you know everything, all the philosophy about jumping. And that, I think, is perhaps what I wanted to talk about. I mean, it is not celebrating losing in a kind of an outsider, because it's a very pertinent point you've raised, that, it's all great fun when you are like, you could very easily say, like my mother said, that, oh, you're such a clever chap, you've already made your own deficiencies into, like, you started celebrating your deficiencies. I've always celebrated my deficiencies. That's the only way to kind of, come out of it. But I just feel that there should be other reasons why people do things just rather than just winning, I mean.
That's the reason why what we're trying to talk is perhaps changing the definition of what winning means. Because no matter what, ultimately, in the heart of hearts, we're all here to win in some way or the other, however subjective it might be. For example, even like if we talk about the Olympics, I mean, even getting selected for the Olympics can be considered as a winning point, right? So there are no absolutes for that matter. So that's one thing, but then, taking the canvas to, making it a little more bigger, because, what you were talking about in your last segment, it seemed like a little bit of a postmodern elitist narrative, which may be, where your feelings and emotions are in a rarefied universe. Whereas if we talk about, say, people who have historically lost, the people who have been oppressed, who've been downtrodden, who've lost out to history, the lower castes, the poor, etc., etc., so many of them. So where is the meaning that are they supposed to be languishing in their losses because a romantic artist finds a certain set of aesthetics out there and we're supposed to talk about it in that perspective, or the point is to actually get up and struggle hard for those little victories, to win eventually, and to win their equality, to win their successes.
Yeah, I mean, I completely agree with your point, because I do believe that there are historic losers, right? Let's take a historic loser, Bhopal, people of Bhopal, all right? And I did something for Olympics, and I have been an activist, a sort of a kind, no, activist sounds like a bit of a comic book character. But I'm just saying that I had been someone who was involved with the Bhopal movement. And so when I started like that for many years, and so when I started working on accepting this project, which was technically by the Olympics committee, I was asked that why am I doing this? Shouldn't I be boycotting? Shouldn't I be like, as someone who's like sort of, seen all this Bhopal, I mean, kind of almost like linking up what I was doing with the Great Bhopal gas tragedy, as if I am making it happen. And it's very funny, the arguments by these people had nothing to do with Bhopal. They were the postmodern elitist lot you were talking about. I hardly ever think of myself as a postmodern. I don't even actually particularly enjoy postmodernism as a movement. But anyway, so I'm just saying that, who are you? I mean, not you, as in who is the Indian government to say that, I am going to boycott the Olympics, when some Manipuri boxers under BPL are practicing 5 years, trying to kind of get a bronze, which might actually change the entire sort of, state of women's emancipation or gender or sort of, funding even of that particular area. So I'm just saying that we just perhaps have to have more sort of dominant discourse around losing, more, I suppose, poetic understanding of what losing is, because I don't want to undermine losers, because these are all people who have lost despite struggling. So I'm not
exactly. So that's what I would say. When you use the term poetic understanding, I'd rather say we should have a more political, economic understanding of the structures. Why a certain country never qualifies, why a certain country produces more number of losers and a certain country always produces more number of winners. I don't know, I mean, if it's so much to do with the genetics or the biological makeups, but rather with the structures that they have to produce a certain category of athletes. Your sporting structure, your sporting infrastructure, or your political economic structure. And of course, it's all related and it's all interrelated. It's all so got to do with the entire global capital market as well. So don't you think that when you say, of course, there's a dignity in losing, and of course, we must celebrate losers, but what are we trying to celebrate? Are we trying to celebrate the fact that we are trying to celebrate the losers because here they are, because they have lost, because the point is to get to the condition where there are equal conditions for everybody for winning and losing. And then, then winning could be celebrated as euphorically as it is. Otherwise, it's always this battle between haves and have-nots rather than your skill at winning or losing.
Well, first of all, what are we celebrating? We are celebrating humanity. Humanity is perhaps what we are trying to get at. Now, regarding your question about it is already under conversation whether countries that win, why do they win? I mean, they have tremendous infrastructure, they have tremendous sort of possible, already that's been discussed about. So that also perhaps has happened because the discourse around winning has been complicated, all right? And one more thing which has become quite prevalent is, now, if you, I recently was speaking to a friend's whose son was in one of the Calcutta schools, and says, I just don't want my child to come back every day and study for 6 hours and have this mind which only can accept only the things that are useful for him. That, okay, this is not important because this is not going to be this is not going to come in the papers. This is not going to help me pass an exam. This is just like a soft thing which I should like sort of, perhaps do it or not do it, like Sunday school, right? Now, what my college, for example, and many other colleges in Delhi University, for example, like bizarre marks that is required to get in, like, 120 or something like that, cutoff percentage. I mean, I could not have got into my college in this milieu. Now they're like sort of, somewhat, if I may use the word, feminizing this whole thing. Now suddenly it doesn't matter if you only get 99, because there are lots of people getting 99. You just go but there are like suddenly looking that, okay, this person seems to have an interest in liberal arts, or has an intellectual curiosity over something, or can, write a poem or make a poster or something like that. And that kind of, extracurricular sort of, stuff is sort of getting in. This is because, and like, children, a lot of parents are taking their kids off certain schools which are only emphasizing on this sort of studies. And what we are creating is this sort of, group of monsters. Okay, sorry. You're creating a group of monsters, right? Your entire life is being sort of spelled out. So you're going to spend the first 12 years of your life preparing for one particular examination, all right? Then you get through that. If you are unfortunate enough to get through that examination, then you have another 4 years when you are geared to sort of, get through to another examination, all right? By then you are dull as a neem tree, okay? Every bit of sort of possibility of like having a conversation or everything has been dulled. You can't be placed into like sort of a social situation and be expected to actually have a regular conversation, right? Then if you get into this sort of, after that second exam, if you get through that second exam, then you get incorporated into another world which is perhaps about banking and things like that. Basically another category of failures, but not my kind of failures, not the noble failures, but the horrible types of failures, all right? People who failed in life. Then you get a trophy husband or a trophy wife, usually a trophy. This is a very male conversation I'm talking about. You get a trophy wife who starts a little like sort of, art fund or something like that. And then suddenly one day you realize that, shit, man, I'm halfway through. I've done all the things. I've written all the right, I've gone through all the like right hurdles. Now I have to write a book. So that's your another extracurricular activity. You acquired that sort of a thing, because you're not going to get a promotion if you don't write a book, because all the bankers have to write a book. Okay, then suddenly one day you realize that you have all these years that you've like sort of spent in trying to get the checklist corrected. And this kind of thing happens when you're like typically in mid 30s and early 40s. You suddenly realize that you don't have a rich inner life. A person who has been working as upper division clerk at Writers Building might have a richer life than you in your like sort of Hong Kong job or Shanghai job, because you have nothing to hold on to except for your sales figure, except for money. How many times can you go to the opening of a new restaurant? How many times can you go to like Mauritius or Seychelles for a holiday? How many times? You're like just spiritually bankrupt. Then you go do satsang and become like a right-wing Hindu or something. Or you become a cult of Shiva. You become like some dangerous time bomb. Like a kind of a Indian Taliban.
Okay, let me just tell you a story the other way around. I don't know if you've seen this film called The Beautiful Losers by Aaron Rose. Okay, this is about, this movie is titled Beautiful Loser, and it's about a bunch of artists, a bunch of street graffiti artists who used to make this street art, and they were all, and it was called the DIY movement, do-it-yourself movement, where they would not care for societal approval, so they would only make the art just for art's sake and for themselves. But then slowly and gradually all these guys become successful, commercially successful. And then this film is made by one of those artists, Aaron Rose, and it talks about Thomas Campbell, etc., etc. And it shows how these people who were so much for this movement, of this do-it-yourself movement, where it only art for art's sake, and it had nothing to do with commercial viability or commercial success, when they become commercially successful, how their outlook changes, and how these people then start reacting very, very differently to societal approvals too. And also, let me talk about Banksy, I'm sure, because, he has been...
Talk to me about Banksy. I absolutely don't like him.
Okay, yeah, so you can just kind of show your dislike. You're absolutely free to show it over here. But what I'm trying to, he's definitely not a loser amongst the circuit of anonymous losers. He's definitely not a loser, but then his art is as subversive as it gets. So, do you think this notion that radical art, can or should exist with societal approval, it's true or not? And what are your views on
Hey,
that?
radical art is a big fashion statement, first of
Okay.
all right? Like people who wear like Che t-shirts. I mean, the number of McKinsey executives in the evening when they go out and like sort of, go to this Buddha lounge bar and drink their like very colorful looking cocktails, wearing the Che t-shirts with their with their sort of slightly puffed chest, shapeless and drooping. Uh, you realize that Che is like the biggest middle class hero or upper middle class hero that has ever been. I mean, it's just like the level of commodity. I find graffiti art as vandalism, all right? Like some disgruntled youth trying most of it. Like there are some like interesting like protest stuff and all that. And I'll be very unpopular in Delhi if I say that, because now Max Muller has started like funding graffiti art, which was something which was always like a sign of sort of protest and things like that. It's become like hype. In Bombay, soon Firoz Gujral will be opening. They'll have curtains pulled around so that Bappi Lahiri can come and inaugurate graffiti art and all that kind of thing. And there's Banksy's and all that kind of, they take the most basic, I am an anarchist. Do you even know how to spell anarchist? Do you even know what anarchism is? Like, the quietest people are the most anarchist people. I mean, I think my father who worked in a bank is even more anarchist than these guys. But so, I mean, I have no sympathy for this sort of, somebody quietly write, if somebody produces a book over many, 3 years of like cutting down any kind of financial possibilities and like working, or somebody sort of solving or putting a paper together, somebody working on integrated agriculture, I mean, whatever, is an someone who just like, is the center. This is the Tulsi of my own Angan problem. I want just to be seen, and I won't have 20 Facebook photographs of me being seen. And I just no sympathy for that. So wrong person to ask about Banksy, and wrong person to ask about graffiti art.
How much time do we have now, Roshan? I mean,
Okay. Oh shit, I made a negative tone. I should talk about positive things now.
So let's talk about any one of your favorite slides from the gallery of losers, and why is it your favorite, and what is it that you exactly want to say? Okay, also explain some of it, because I didn't understand, the one which says, this guy is thinking how to spell eerie, and you say it's an Indian gaze, and I didn't understand that.
It's in what case?
Indian gaze. It's the entire slide is from, because I don't know if it's here or not. It's not on the text, but in one of the website which kind of has reported on that, it has described it as you saying that this is a completely Indian gaze, where this guy is looking at, he's I think he's reached the break point or the match point, and then that one. That eerie one, if you could just do.
Yeah, I know what. But I mean, I'm just trying to wonder the Indian gaze part of it. I mean, I remember Pargat Singh could never really make a goal because the fact that he could come so close to the goal meant that he has already achieved whatever he had to achieve, and then while to convert the goal into convert the penalty into a goal was something he thought was maybe an act of divine intervention, which he should not personally be involved with. I mean, just the fact that he had a hockey stick in his hand and he had to hit the ball was something that escaped him. But I mean, perhaps that's why it is a bit of an Indian situation that we just don't, I mean, I at least don't have the final finishing. But I don't think it's typically Indian. I think it might have been a misquote or something like that. But I like this one. I like because that one has it evokes when this one is one of why don't you do one thing, just make it into a and do one after another, then I can just sort of quickly talk about this is the common monoculture of winners. They all look like characters from a Julius Caesar Act 3 Scene 3 kind of a situation. They all have that same kind of
laughter, and they're all kind of holding a part. It almost looks like they're holding up a part of their anatomy, which is they're like, I mean, the simple word to use for them, like they look like wankers, but they are perhaps winners, I suppose. Both the words start with W. But so this is a lot of people can see through this image and see themselves in it or not. Next one is, this is a fellow who accidentally gets pierced by a javelin while he is, I mean, again, this is not, neither of them are losers. It's just that he was denied a medal because he got pierced by javelin. This one got a lot of attention for some strange reason. There are some posters also which nobody has seen yet. And if you go back to the main menu, this is this guy who could not save 3 goals and decided to hang himself by his hand, the same hand with which you could not block those goals, for a period of 1 week till he had to be cut open. This was vandalized several times because England, each time it lost, somebody would come and vandalize the posters. So that was quite nice. I have pictures of it being vandalized. Next one, this I like very much because it brings in a certain bit of history. That's Hassan Sardar. I don't know anybody remembers him. He was like a hockey great. And this was the time of India and Pakistan. I mean, hockey was, literally nobody could actually enter that premise. Of course, then over a period of time, India and Pakistan had other things to worry about, such as how to do chabi to each other. Like these bureaucrats who are complete, these are like, again, not my kind of losers. They're like the bad losers. They're like the banker losers. All they can do is like do chabi. Back, please. All they can do is like they can do chabi, and they can just sort of make things, stop things from happening. There's one thing called cynicism, and one thing is like a very harmful attribution of people stopping things from happening. In South Asia, when you often, I mean, I've been from Calcutta to Karachi to Bombay. I've often, in full sunlight glare, you might want to buy some staples because you suddenly run out of staples from your stapler. So you go to the nearest stationery shop, and since I walk everywhere, in that 41-degree heat, I've gone to the stationery shop looking for a stationer's. Nothing would give him more pleasure than coming up with an ear-to-ear smile and saying that, sorry, out of stock. And that beautiful pleasure of saying no is just so inherent, and nobody can do it better than the bureaucrats, particularly Home Office. And this is a great group of people. So basically it says that while 3 generations of hockey players are trying to set up Hassan Sardar's penalty shot, the setting looks a little bleak, which is basically the Indo-Pak bureaucrats sitting next to each other, completely obscuring the goal. So I like this one because it's got that kind of a slightly raw politics behind it. Next one, please. This is, of course, my favorite. I mean, I've shaped myself around this film star. His name is Jitendra. And I think fundamentally I'm an incarnation of him. And this is one of my favorite videos in entire Bollywood called Dhal Gaya Din. And I start my day looking at it, and I sort of end my day looking at it. And such a positive human being. But this story is slightly perhaps not so positive. So this is Jitendra's sort of character who, next one please. These are my flatmates from all these characters, the people I've known once upon a time, but they're not sportsmen per se. This is my Turkish flatmate who somewhere midway in the middle of a jump realizes that perhaps he might have chosen the wrong spot. Because from the corner of his eyes, he looks that 2 Roman rings are hanging from a pole vault. And so this is also one of my favorite. I have another in the poster section. I've got another pole vault, but this man is about to jump, and he finds very eerie, right on top, standing there, is a person, small, sitting there, looking outside. And each time he jumps, there's one person there, and it's basically kind of like his demon, like his nemesis. And before he jumps, this guy turns and he finds, so it says that, 19 feet or so above sea level, Stelios Bouboukis is petrified that he's going to meet his own, his biggest enemy. And when he turns, you see it's his own face. So biggest enemy, which is he himself. Next one, please. This is again a man who kind of, looks at this invisible chair, this unoccupied chair, and realizes that these are all characters who I've known, and like Shayan said, that these are archives of people who I have always sort of, kept in some kind of sort of mental hard disk, or as my father's driver says, hard disks. It's in somewhere in one sort of corner of my hard disks, which sort of comes out in strange ways. I guess time is pretty much over, right? So we could take some questions now.
Just to sum this conversation between me and Sarnath up, and maybe, just being the host of the event and also being the moderator, I could just have the last word of this conversation. Basically, what I want to say and what I take back from this conversation, well, dialectics of loss, it's a pretty ambitious name for this whole thing. Of course, we can't be sitting here and building an entire dialectics of what it means. But what I basically want to say and want all of you to take away from this is that, this whole perception that we are living in some kind of a post-political universe where, politics has only got to do with these expert areas of government and administration, and, and all other concepts, all other talk about winning and losing, sexuality, or race issues, all kinds of other issues are cultural issues, which is not so, And it's very important to, as Marx had said, that the base has to be the political economy on which your superstructure is hinged. So all your ideas of winning, losing, failure, success is the superstructure, which is basically related to your political economic structure which you belong to. So it's very, very important to understand that fundamentally to tackle and analyze and solve any problems that we face today. Of course, we are engaging in paradoxes every day. And it's not so easy to apply all the old rules from the past. There would be new rules. But what I would suggest is that I think it's time that we should actually withdraw from it all and kind of think and try and figure out what's happening around us, so that ultimately we emerge from that thought to maybe bring out, to construct a new vocabulary where winning and losing might mean something else than what it means right now. So, that's what I wanted to say. And now you all can ask your questions to Sarnath. And so you could ask first.
Hello. My question is in the context of your graphic novel Corridor, which I'd read long before your Olympics project actually started. And the first thing that struck me about the characters in the novel was that except for the Parsi bookseller in Connaught Place, everyone else was a loser. It's like, I'm a man and then I'm a loser. Or before being a man, I'm a loser. And then through the course of the novel, they have their complications, they have their journeys, and they're finally able to arrive at some kind of solutions to the very specific problems that they're facing in their lives. So do you think those solutions come as the defining turning points of their lives where they change into winners, or do they continue to be the losers before being the men that they are? Thank you.
May I know who I'm speaking to?
My name is Shritama Bose. I am from the third year English Department of Presidency.
Shritama. Thank you for evoking characters from my past. It's almost like sort of relatives who I have, who are brought in, during a wedding or death, whatever makes people get together. I think it's very good observation on your part, because obviously there's a span of, I don't know, 20 years or it's between that and now, and that makes me believe that this idea probably came organically rather than me trying to
do yet another proposal and yet another new idea. It sort of seemed that there was a bit of the loser in me even then. And this sort of, I always hated exclusivity, because in Delhi, in a city, I went to Delhi, I started doing college, and everybody is like sort of someone's son or someone's daughter, or part of some clique and part of um, it's not that like that anymore. But there was that clique, and eventually even I became part of a certain clique, not a very strong one, but and I just wanted to react really strongly, and I wanted to create a world. What about like normal people? What about like people who are not part of sort of? So Shintu, for example, was my landlord's son who had a girlfriend. I had to buy him cigarettes and his girlfriend cigarettes, and pay rent to the mother, and also buy I literally supported him, and he was like several years older than me, a very sweet guy, but he had all these sort of I transplanted all these sort of sexual problems into him, and this sort of Rangunwala, who's not Parsi by the way, who's Bori, well, at least he does not exist, so he can be Parsi as well, but he was, in my mind, he was Bori. And Digital is a character who does not understand the whole idea of losing and defeating, because he lives in another ethereal space. He's like a enchanted shaman who is above all of us. He's a prophet. He's a modern urban day prophet whose even identity is not somehow known. Whether he's like actually Digital Datta, whether he is the wandering Jew, whether he's an incarnation of someone's imagination, whether it's like an imaginary dialogue people are having with them. So they're all beyond this winning and losing, at least Digital Datta is. So it's interesting that you mentioned that that there is a link, and perhaps this is why the link has sort of, but it was not supplanted before, because I was not, it's a good observation, I think. But yeah, I mean, that time they did come to resolutions, but now I'm reasonably resolution free. I just like to mirror. I have taken away the opinion, and as I'm getting older and older, I have less and less opinion about how people should run their life or the country or whatever. I mean, and that's a political stance. That's not like I'm rejecting and I'm becoming like I'm not interested. I'm very interested, because when I show the mirror, I guide the mirror. And in my guiding of the mirror, I decide what to show. So it is politics, perhaps, but politics with a small p. And it's politically more astute than informed. It's not information based. It's more, I think, in digested politics, I suppose. I don't know whether I answered that question properly, but yeah, it was a good discussion though.
Hi, sir.
Yeah, thank you.
In your other novels, like in Bar Novels, Wondrous Labours, there's this constant sense of competition. Like when you mention the feud between the two zamindars, one gets one horse for his carriage, the other gets two, the other gets three, and then finally the second one gets a zebra.
Right.
And then in the Harappa files, where the mother takes the sons to the karate classes, and one can hear someone singing, practicing to sing. So there's this constant sense of competition, but put to hilarious effect, or cynical. So does that something to do with the Tulsi of our Angan that you were mentioning earlier?
Sorry, I didn't get the last part of your question.
Does that something to do with what you said, the Tulsi of your Angan?
The Tulsi of... that's a very good observation, because when you do your own work, I think you guys all know about the death of the author. You write something and then it's not yours anymore. It is someone else's, and it's yours. I mean, to interpret. And when I hear these things, I feel overjoyed, because these interpretations are obviously based on symbols that I let go, like the phantom layers that I just I don't know myself, and they're to be prized open by. So when you're saying this, and I'm totally see the point with some very brilliant clarity, that yes, of course, I mean, how could I have not understood that these are like two gentlemen of furious entitlement. They probably grew up knowing that they are the so-called the absolute center of their own worlds and center of their own universe. And of course, there's contemporary as well. Like a lot of people, think like that as well. You're brought up to think like that, and more so in this sort of nuclear society. And it's nice. Thank you for pointing that out. That yes, these are Navakrishna and I think Digambar are two very similar. They're not very far from here. Uh, their entire dabdaba, as we call it, their entire stories are wreaked. I mean, are thumbed on the streets and the pavement of that area. I mean, if you walk through Shobha Bajar, I mean, I get this very ghastly, not ghastly, this very strange, eerie feeling that all this was happening around just a few, maybe just a century back, and it's amazing that level of continuity still exists in this city. It's phenomenal. Thanks.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you.
First of all, I would like to thank you. It was a very refreshing conversation that you both had. Now, you talked about marginalization, you talked about abjection. Now, in the word gallery, in gallery of losers, there is a hidden connotation of a space. In our society, in our existing society, there is a kind of a vacuum for losers. Do you want to create a defined space for losers, or do you want to integrate losers and winners into the same space, or do you want to create a separate culture of loss?
Yeah, that's a brilliant question. I think it's did you say a separate cultural, can you please put the microphone back to, did you say a separate cultural space for losers?
A culture of loss where you would glorify losers as winners do. Like,
This is very interesting because Prita and I had a discussion before, and she, and we were having a cup of coffee in a cafe near a house, and we were discussing just this, what you were saying, and she had also very succinctly mentioned this whole thing that are we in the danger of creating a separate culture of losers and exempting losers and creating slackers in not so nice ways. And it's a very problematic question. I don't quite know how to answer that because it is a very difficult and a very nice question. Like one of the answers is basically when the posters were out all over London, I started getting, because there's a cue card. So you take the QR, you take that and you can get into the website and the identity of the artist. And I started getting emails, and I got strange kind of emails. I got one email by this South African woman who lived in London, young South African woman, who was just going through a divorce. And she said that, I saw the pole vault, not this one, but the poster one. And it sort of somehow helped her in an interesting way. It didn't sound like Reader's Digest or Deepak Chopra. She said that, it kind of brought in a new conversation in my life, which perhaps is what you're talking about, a culture of losing, she thought that she lost a very large part of her life in that marriage. I mean, kind of losers who I really have, I don't think they're my losers, because the ones which I'm talking about are very dignified lot, because they try, they wake up, it's just like a detail that they don't lose, but they do everything a winner does except win. They just lose. So
now people pose as winners. Perhaps after your book and after a few decades after you, people will pose as losers. I mean, they will come up and say what you're speaking about, that they will come dignified losers and not your type of losers. The not your type of losers will come up and say, well, I haven't tried, so I'm a loser, so please dignify me. So that might happen.
Yeah, I think she definitely has a better answer.
No, what you're trying to say is the commodification of losing, right? Exactly. So, yeah. So it's-
You are right. You grabbed me.
we live in a free market where everything has to be sold ultimately, right? So if we don't kind of, that's why I was trying to say, if you don't give hammer blows to your structure, everything will ultimately return to you, haunting you like an object in the market, right? Your tears, your losses, your failures, everything. So that's my answer to the question.
The cult of losers can be quite dangerous. And I would like to maybe do it case by case. If someone comes and says that, oh, I'm a loser and all that, I said, yeah, you're a loser. So deal with it. I mean, it's your loss, but I mean, I don't want to be hanging around with losers myself. I mean, no, I don't like losers.
Thank you. I just wanted that statement.
Anybody else?
Hello, hello sir.
Hi.
I'm Sulakshana. I'm a big fan of yours. Okay. Uh, when I read Barnow's Wondrous Capers, like it was definitely there in Corridor, and it's definitely there in Harappa Files, which is very episodic. When I was going through Barnow's Wondrous Capers, I mean, it was almost like as if I was watching a Tom Tykwer film. I mean, the way, I mean, I can only say that the way one visual comes after the other, I mean, I could just say that, okay, yeah, cut to this, and yeah, like it's amazing, and it's so cinematic, and you being a filmmaker yourself, I mean, I just want, I don't know. I mean, I've never watched your films or anything. I don't know whether you like Tom Tykwer or not, but this is amazing thing that like I love the humor, the wit, and everything. And yeah, it's not a question. It's just a lot of what I don't know. It's just coming out like this. I can barely stand still. So yeah. So yeah, that's there, and yeah, I mean,
It's interesting that you mentioned the film part. It's a lot of a tussle. Sometimes it is difficult to uh, describe one world with another world. I mean, if a, if a comic book becomes like a film, then why not just a film? Why make it into comic book? So these are questions which trouble me all the time. So obviously, when I'm doing a comic book, it has to be beyond the film. It has to basically reveal the limitations of cinema. Um, so, say for example, if it's the complexities of, say, gender politics, for example. Now, if you make a film out of it, the discussion can become very preachy and stilted and uncomplex when you do it in a film. But when you do it in comics, it can come, deal, you can get into the subject from many angles. And in those, the multiplicity of trying to understand, this is what we were discussing also, Shayan was part of that conversation yesterday, where comics or text and image can create an entire universe of a very complex universe which perhaps cinema can't. But cinema has its own powers as well. It can completely immerse you in the time thing. And the director decides how long you need to see, what you need to see, and move on to the next thing. But in comics, you decide. So it basically, you can always sort of, very quickly, like my colleague Parismita Singh says, a comics has to be read at one go, hungrily, greedily, devouring it very quickly without actually seeing all the subtleties, and then relishing slowly, page after page after page, going back and forth. So she had the most beautiful way of describing how a comic should be read. So I try to kind of, I love films. I mean, but my film, the approach that I use for making film and the approach that I use for making comics are, I try to keep them separate, milk and meat separate, kosher. But sometimes, because I'm a filmmaker, the cuts look like cinematic. But I try to look at them as different mediums, but sometimes you can't help it. Which one was that? Post the menopausal. Oh God. Oh yeah. Oh God. Post-menopausal. She's my landlady. Yes, of course, she's post-menopausal. But yeah, she's post a lot of things. She's post-human also. Sometimes I feel she's a goddess to her son and a monster to the rest. She's quite a character. I mean, all kind of bigotry can be found in her, but this kind of strange redeeming character as well. So yeah. Probably same phyla and same like sort of general classification of zoology.
Uh, my question is, you spoke of two kinds of losers, your kind of losers and the bad kind of losers. Like the bad kinds of losers are usually those Tulsi Ka Angan kind of losers. They collide and collateral damage occurs usually. So what would you advocate for them? Like, would you advocate?
Your voice is sounding muffled. Can
What
you
would
hold
you-
it a little further down? Yeah.
What would you advocate for these kinds of potentially damaging kinds of losers? Would you advocate objective detachment or a complete alienation from society altogether?
Yeah, I think it links up with his question as well, his comment. Uh, I think you know one when you see one. You know, when the person is trying to like, the other day a friend of mine, Bultu, who's a translator, he translated Chaurungi into English, was telling about an incident where he bumped into a very leading poet in a taxi. I mean, there was like, it was raining and they were like sort of, they were in somewhere in Gariahat and they were like, they just sort of flagged the taxi. He flagged the taxi and then this gentleman was quietly getting drenched. He said that, can I drop you somewhere? He said, yeah, you can drop me. And and it happened to be in Park Circus. And while being dropped, this gentleman asked Bultu what he did for living. Bultu said that I'm a translator and I work in a small sort of online e-company. And then, so Bultu, out of politeness, asked this guy, so what did you do for a living? He said, I write for a small publication. So Bultu said, oh, that's nice. Which one is that? He said, it's called Desh. So, yeah. And then Bultu was a bit pissed off. He said, like, he's trying to what? Like, what is he? Is he fishing for something away? And then he stopped asking all this. He said, Desh is, yeah, I don't know much about that magazine. Friends of mine read it. I might have seen a copy here and there. So the guy looked at him and says, you haven't heard of Desh? You can always deal with these types of losers. They are real losers. They are and then he says, all right, so he said, yeah, I know about it. And he says, so this guy gets quite flustered and he says that, actually, I write poetry for them. He says, oh, poetry is good. I don't read much poetry myself, but I mean, I have friends, again, who read poetry, who also subscribe to this. And he says, I'm actually the poetry editor of this. He got like really whacked off. And then turns out that he's a very famous, and then he finally mutters his name. And turns out that and Bultu all this while recognized this guy. And he was just trying to sham it. That, because this guy was trying to sham it. And he turned out to be like a very famous, if you take the name of one poet, it would probably be him. And turns out that it was him. So, there are all kinds of losers. I think instinct will tell you, guide you, which kind of loser are we talking about. So I don't think I would be too worried about, if someone comes and tells me that, I am this kind of a loser, I said, yeah, not only are you a loser, you're a duffer as well. And there are others also. So, yeah. Great. So,
So at the end of the thing, I just want to share one story which happened to me early in the morning today. And I was actually getting my son, he's a 9-year-old boy, and I was supposed to drop him to school. And I asked, and he plays football for the football team in school. And I asked him, what do you think about winners and losers? And he said that, Mama, losers are hard workers, but winners are fluke people. I said, what do you mean by fluke? He said, because Mama, whenever I've scored a goal, it's by fluke. So I think they are fluke people. So, that's another story, which is of my son, and so winners couldn't, I think, so that's how I think we should end the conversation here. And thank you so much for coming, and do have a look at the magazines, and hopefully we can return once again and talk to you about more things.
what can I say? I mean, as we started the whole evening by saying that how people are archives, and I have to have these conversations in order to kind of, think and start working on new works, because the beginning point is always a conversation. And I thought that today I had a very lovely afternoon. I'm not saying this like I was saying, the touring writer who says the same thing and this is an amazing audience and all that rubbish people say, like it's a great city and this is the most amazing afternoon I had. None of that. I genuinely think that we had a very good conversation. Thank you very much.
SULAK SHANA.
SHALAK SHANA, right?
Yeah, SHANA.
I remember my mother, when I was reading this book, my mother used to, I was still in school, just before ISC, and my mother won't let me read this book. And this one day I was in the bathroom, and my mother was just flipping through the book, and she saw some of the things that you said about the zamindars and everything. And she was like, what are you doing? What are you doing reading this book? This man...
There's some naughty scenes.
There are naughty stuff, and then this man is eating your head out. And I was like, don't talk about things you don't understand.
I hope she feels the same even now.
Could you just smile for the camera? Thank you so much.
Be in touch.
Surely, right?